CIT 1121 presentation video, module 2, subsections 1 and 2, and maybe even 3. I'm not sure where we'll end, but we'll do at least the very first one. And if you're not sure, just look at the title, because I always put however many sections we put in there. So let's take a look at all the different sections that there are. We actually aren't going to go through all of them. So if we take a look here at the modules and objectives, we have Cisco iOS access, we'll talk about that. iOS navigation, let's talk about that. Command structure, basic device configuration, save configurations, ports and addresses, and then that's where we're going to end. The configure IP addressing. Oh no, we'll do configure IP addressing. What we won't do is verify connectivity. That section, we're going to go ahead and cut that one at the end. So just be aware of that. It didn't get lost. It just, I didn't feel like doing it. So it's not out there. Cisco iOS access. Let's start with that. So the first thing they want to let you know about Cisco routers and switches is they're just computers. They're just basic computers that don't have graphical user operating systems. They use a command line interface. So you can see here, it brings up a couple of points, and you can see the letters CLI and GUI, and that's what they're getting into those two. And we'll see GUI and CLI in the next slides as well. But it talks about something called the shell, the kernel, and the hardware. And when they talk about the shell is the interface between the user and the computer. So when you enter commands into the shell, it tells the computer what it is that you want to do. The kernel communicates between the hardware and the software of the computer. So all computers are going to have hardware and software, right? So you have a mouse, that's hardware, and you move it around, and then the cursor moves around, and that is the piece of hardware communicating with software and letting it know that you should move the little arrow around when you move the mouse. And then hardware, of course, you guys know what hardware is. So nothing too exciting there. This slide just talks about, the GUI or GUI interface, graphical user interface, something that was designed and really put into main use. Oh, wow. Windows 3.1 was one of the first ones I can remember. There was a KDE desktop. Solaris had something. There's a whole bunch of them back in the 90s, but for the most part, Windows 95, I guess, was the big one that showed up as a graphical user interface. That the operating system was Windows, and you could just turn it on, and the Windows would show up. With Windows 3.1, you used to have to go to a command line for DOS and type in, I can't even remember, WIN, I think. You type in win and hit enter, and then Windows 3.1 would load on top of the DOS, which was a command line interface. So we went from command line, now we're into graphical user interfaces, and everyone uses these. You see them with your Linux boxes on your phones, your iPhones for your Mac operating systems, and then we're going to go back into command line because the Cisco devices still use command line. Type in a command, press enter, something happens. No icons, no mouse, no graphics, no cool background. None of that stuff is going to be part of what we're going to do in this class. So keep that in mind. So the purpose of the operating system is to create a pleasant environment for you to get things done. So you've got a place where you can store your applications that help you make your life easier, and those applications will run. Cisco iOS is based around one application, the CLI, the command line interface, that runs on it. It is called Cisco iOS, and I know that Apple also uses the term iOS, but for this class, we're going to say iOS is Cisco iOS, not Apple iOS, and it's just the name of the command line operating system that you can run with your Cisco products. Now, here's the thing. Cisco, in order to gain access into that command line, you have to use another computer that has a keyboard and a screen. So there are a few different ways to get in. The access methods that are most commonly used are through a special cable called a console cable. So you've got a picture of it here in the upper right-hand side. This interface here, it kind of looks like a video cable, but it is not. It is actually a 9-pin serial interface. You see it on a lot of older computers, and you plug that into your computer. If you don't have a 9-pin serial interface, do not worry. You can buy a USB to serial interface for your laptop. It'll do the exact same thing. So 9-pin serial on one side, that usually plugs into your computer, and then the other side is set as what's called a rollover cable, talk about what a rollover cable is when we get into cabling. And it's a twisted pair eight wire or 4 pair twisted pair cable that rolls the pinouts over from the serial jack interface into the RJ45 jack interface, and that allows communication between the Cisco device um, and the computer that you're using. So that will create a conduit or a connection between those two devices by connecting that cable. Now, once the cable is connected, how do we get to see the command line interface of the Cisco IOS? Well, we have to use a software product called a RS-232 hyperterminal emulation product. Usually we'll use PuTTY or we'll use Teraterm in Packet Tracer. It comes with its own that doesn't really have a name, but that is a method that we can use. All right, so console. All right, so when you think of console, think of that blue connector, serial to RJ45, rollover cable, RS-232, hyperterminal emulation software, PuTTY, Teraterm, something like that. Okay. Keep those things in mind. So that's console. Now, let's suppose, and the console connection is always going to be used when you have direct access to the device. The device will have a port located somewhere. It'll be an RJ45 jack, and it'll have the word console written right above it. And you'll know that's where you're supposed to plug your console cable in to gain access into the operating system. If you do not have direct physical access to the device, you're going to have to come up with another way. Well, luckily, intermediary equipment for networks is accessible via a network. So if you put the correct IP address or the correct addressing information on the device, you can utilize TCP/IP as a path towards getting into the CLI of the device. So those two methods are known as Secure Shell and Telnet. I wish Telnet was in bullet point number 2 because it was kind of before Secure Shell, but Telnet was a method to create a connection to the CLI of a router or switch, and you could then configure the device through TCP/IP. So at your desk, not directly connected to the router or switch. Secure Shell is a secure form of Telnet, which does the exact same thing. It just encrypts the data from your device to the router or switch that you're configuring. Okay? Hopefully that's enough on that. Here's some RS-232 hyperterminal emulation products. In the classroom, if we ever get back into the classroom, you'll see that we have PuTTY and Teraterm, both installed on all the computers. And you can download these yourself and you can use these. And it's not just Cisco devices. There's lots and lots of devices that are out there that have console ports that you can configure with a console device. Okay. All right, 2.2. I think we'll go through 2.2 and then we'll break this one off. So iOS navigation, Cisco iOS. Remember, that's the name of the operating system. Navigation. How do we get around inside of the operating system? Well, we have to look at certain cues. So one of the things that I was taught when I was a young person was that you should concentrate on things that are important, which is it's actually a very difficult skill. But one of the things that I'm going to ask you to look at here for routers and switches is what's cool is that routers and switches both run Cisco iOS. So if you can configure a router, you can configure a switch. Some of the things you do on them are going to be a little bit different. They have different jobs, but the base system works the same way. And here what they're showing you in these little black windows is that router switch, router switch. Router switch on the right, the part that we're supposed to pay attention to is that there is a small greater than sign next to the host name of the device, which is either router or switch right now. And this is our CLI prompt. So we would type stuff in to the right of where the greater than sign is. And there are going to be certain menu commands that are going to be available next to the greater than sign. And this mode is called exec mode. It's called user exec mode. A lot of times we'll call it user mode. It just means that you can access the device, but you can't do a whole lot of stuff. In order to do a lot of stuff, you got to get out of user exec mode and you got to get into privileged mode. So how do I know if I'm in privileged mode? It's easy. Instead of a greater than sign, there is a pound sign aka hashtag for you younger folks, that sits next to the host name. So how do I know if I'm in privileged mode? I'm in privileged mode because there's # next to the host name. And the number of commands that I can type in here is going to be much greater. I can do a lot more. I have a lot more latitude in privileged mode than I did in exec mode. Now, how do I get there? It's very easy. Just type in the word enable. Type in the word enable, okay? All right, so that's primary command modes. User exec is where you start. Privileged exec is where you go to when you type in enable. Usually we'll put a password in between those two. I didn't mean to do that. And let's move into some other modes that are available to you. Something called global configuration mode. Global config mode is where you're going to configure the device. So user mode, what can you do? Not a lot. How about privileged mode or privileged exec mode? Can I do more? You can do more. You can do more. You can delete the operating system right off of the device. That's something. That's pretty cool. But you can't really configure the device until you get into what's called global configuration mode. This is where the real danger happens. So global configuration mode says I want to change the way the router is working. And here's the crazy part about these devices. If you change the way a router works, a router is going to operate off of the information that's in the RAM, what's in the memory itself. So you make a change, the change is implemented right then and there. You don't have to save it back and restart it or do anything. You make a change, change happens. If it's bad, don't worry. You can unplug it and plug it back in. The change didn't get saved, but the change did happen right then and there. So we're going to go into global config. How do I know if I'm in global config? Because it says config before the #. So in this case, host name switch, then the word config, then the #. I know I'm in global config mode. That means I can make changes. The menu options, I shouldn't say menu, but the options that I can type in through the command line are now different and are going to be dealing with configuring the device, adding an IP address, turning on an interface, adding a description. Who knows? All kinds of crazy things. Global config mode. That's where you'll be. There are some sub config modes as well. Line config, interface config. We'll get into those on a later date. Here's some privileged exec. How do I get from privileged into privileged exec? Use the keyword enable. How do I get out of privileged exec? Or how do I get out of global config? Use the keyword exit. Type in exit, press enter. You will leave global config or you will leave privileged exec mode. Okay, so pretty cool. So you can see here, I'm in global config. Someone typed in line console 0 and it took me into line config mode. Oh, I don't want to be there. Type in exit, it takes you back. So it's just a matter of learning about 15, 25 different commands that you're going to have to be familiar with. And we're going to start right away, like right here, module 2, immediately get into configuring the devices, which is great. So that's the, that's one of the things that you'll do. Here's some other sub modes. End will just get you back into privileged mode. You'll learn these when you do the labs more than anything else. Okay. All right. I'm going to stop here and then we'll come back for section 3.